Hey beautiful souls, my name is Kwezi Madlala and welcome to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and if you're watching this channel for the very first time, welcome to the family. And if you are already a subscriber, you know what we're all about. We're all about faith, lifestyle and inspiration, and today I come back with another faith-based video and we are looking at the book of Daniel. I'm so excited. I was reading the book of Daniel this morning and God was speaking, and there's two things that I want to touch on in this video. Firstly, holiness and being set apart, and secondly, believing and trusting God no matter the circumstance. So let's get into it, and I really pray that the Holy Spirit helps me throughout this entire video. So I want to firstly start off by reading Daniel chapter 1 for context. Please feel free to take out your Bibles to follow through with me, and we can learn together and walk this journey together. So Daniel chapter 1, the heading is Daniel in Nebuchadnezzar's court, and please forgive me if I get any of my pronunciations wrong. I am trying. I am truly trying. Okay, so we can go ahead and read. It goes, during the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. So I felt it was necessary for me to look up what besiege means. It means to beset or surround with armed forces for the purpose of compelling to surrender. So essentially, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem, attacked Jerusalem, and captured the people of Jerusalem, and also captured certain valuable items from Jerusalem. But we'll find out more about that as you read. Verse 2 reads, the Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple of God. So Nebuchadnezzar took them back to the land of Babylonia and placed them in the treasure house of his God. So it's not that King Nebuchadnezzar was powerful than Jerusalem or powerful than the tribe of Judah, but it was just a case of God's will being done, right? So it continues to read in verse 3. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Verse 4. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Train these young men in the language and literature of Babylon. So imagine these young men have been taken captive from their land, Jerusalem, and have now been brought over to Babylon. And now the king has made a clear instruction that these young men have to be, trained in the ways of Babylon and, kind of indoctrinated in the ways of Babylon. Verse 5. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. So the king's mandate was clear. It was to take these young men and have them conform to the ways of Babylon so that he could use them, in whatever way he planned to use them in his palace. And so for them to, work for the king, they had to be accustomed to the ways of this foreign land, Babylon. And mind you, these young men have come from Judah's royal family in Jerusalem. So the king assigns them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens and says they need to be trained for 3 whole years in order to enter the royal service. In verse 6, we come across young men who knew God and were not going to be conformed by their environment. I love this so much because how many times have you and I conformed in different environments and kind of forgot where we come from, forgot who we are in the Lord, and went to Rome and did as how the Romans did, just to fit in, just to hide our nature and who we are. But we read in verse 6 about 4 young men, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and how they were not willing to be conformed by the ways of the world and were determined to keep living out the principles of God, even in a foreign land. So verse 6 reads, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names, so even their names were changed when they got to Babylon. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. Verse 8, but Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. So obviously, Daniel comes from Jerusalem. There's a certain way in which they eat in Jerusalem. There's a certain food they cannot eat, there's a certain way of doing things, and when he comes to Babylon, he keeps those ways. He keeps the traditions of his tribe, Judah, and he's not willing to conform. And he asks, because he was determined not to defile himself, and he asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Verse 9, now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. It's interesting that as much as Daniel was in this foreign land, Babylon, but the favor of God was always with him, even in the foreign land, right? It's just beautiful. Verse 10, but he responded, this is the chief of staff responding to Daniel's request, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I am afraid the king will have me beheaded. Verse 11, Daniel spoke with the attendants who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. Verse 15. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendants fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. So Daniel and his friends' commitment not to eat the food served by the king, resulted in them looking healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So they were winning. It was working for them. They were winning. What they had set in their hearts, not to compromise who they are, not to compromise what their God requires of them, had an impressive result, because through their diet of vegetables and water, there was a clear difference that these guys look healthier and better nourished. So what they're doing is certainly working, and working even more so than if they had continued to just be like, okay, we will have what the king is supplying us, Verse 16, so after that, the attendants fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom, and God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meaning of visions and dreams. So obviously the book of Daniel is quite the book, and it continues to go on, and it shows you how Daniel and his friends kept prioritizing their relationship with God over their environment, over what the king required of them, over everything basically, and they were willing to be set apart. That's the one. They were willing to be set apart. They were willing to live a holy life. They were willing to challenge the laws and ways of living and systems, of Babylon. And I think we can learn a lot from that, especially as young men and women of God in this time and age, that how the saying goes, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, that actually maybe we need to challenge that a bit. Maybe when you are in Rome, don't do as the Romans do, because our God requires so much more from us. We are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. And our identities cannot be reliant on the environments we find ourselves in. This is so real, because there's been so many times where I personally have reduced my faith in God, have, kind of compromised a little, because I found myself in a certain environment. And maybe you have too, but it's people like Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that remind us that you don't have to conform, that God's favor will be with you, even in the foreign land, even in a land where things are not done, in the ways of God. But it doesn't mean that when you enter that land, you now start doing things in the way that they are doing them. But it's very important not to compromise your values, not to compromise your faith, to be set apart, be set apart, be holy. It's not going to be enough for us, to be in certain environments and, stay timid and hide who we are as believers and hide our passions and convictions for God. We are not going to change the world in that way. We are not going to be able to show the world the power of, the God we serve, the power of, the principles of God that we have come to know and believe, and the power of Jesus Christ, essentially. So, I don't know, just by reading the book of Daniel, I was so fired up, and I had to share that, as a young person, especially, of God, be bold about your faith. Be bold. I think, especially in the time that we are living in now, the time to cower down, or the time to pretend like Jesus is not all that, is gone. I really believe that God is calling us, to go deeper, in terms of our faith in Him, to go deeper in terms of representing Him to people, to the nations, in the different environments that we find ourselves in. And, just allowing ourselves to be different, just like Daniel and his friends. They were set on being different. They were set on challenging, the ways of Babylon. They were not about to forsake the ways of God for a foreign land, because they knew that their God was too powerful. They knew that their God was too sovereign, to reject or to set His ways aside. And this was just encouragement for you and I, not to conform. The time to conform is over. It's time for us to be set apart and to be okay with being set apart. Living holy is not deemed as the coolest thing in the society. Living holy is, not readily accepted in the society. It may be seen as uncool, it may be seen as crazy, whatever the case may be. But now we need to get to a point where we show people that this God is alive by living out His precepts and, having faith in Him and living a life worthy of the call we have been called unto Jesus, and the ways of this holy book. So yeah, I come with that encouragement today that it's time for us to live holy. Sikhohle nje ngempela ke manje ukuthi abantu bazothini. Sikhohle ngempela manje ukuthi, you don't do what we do. Oh, so you are set apart. Oh, so you think you're holier than thou. So, whatever the opinions might be, or whatever the environments may be requiring of you that is contrary to, what God has called you to be, it's time for us to shut the noise. Like, we are living for Jesus, we are living holy lives, and that's that. And we have such amazing examples here with Daniel, with Hananiah, with Mishael, with Azariah. They could have been like, okay, well, we're in Babylon now, time for us to have some wine and some food. But the word of God says they were determined not to defile themselves by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. And may we be determined not to defile ourselves with the things of this world, but to be set apart. Second thing I got from the book of Daniel that I had to share, there's a lot I got, but that I have to share in this video, is believing in God regardless of the circumstance, choosing God regardless of the situation, honoring God regardless of the situation. And I also shared a TikTok video on this, that we need to get to a point where we understand the sovereignty of God, that we develop a relationship with God that is so deep and, so strong that whatever may come our way, we're able to stand, on the promises of God, and we're able, to keep the faith in God. So I want us to look at Daniel chapter 3, and maybe without, having this video be too long, we can start in verse 13. So just to give you guys context, at this point, King Nebuchadnezzar had, built this gold statue, and he required, of everyone to bow down to this gold statue. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, no, we are not doing that. Like, forget about that. We are not doing that. And we can start reading from verse 13. Chapter 3, verse 13 reads, Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. So this is after finding out that they were not willing to bow down to this golden statue he had built. It continues to say, when they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you'll be thrown immediately into the burning furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Verse 18. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. This got me thinking, like, what is it, or what was the encounter that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had with the God of Israel, the God that they were serving in Jerusalem, that made them so bold and made it so easy for them to be like, we're not compromising. Sorry, sir. We trust in our God that much. We trust that even if he lights up this furnace of fire, he will rescue us. And listen, even if he doesn't, it's okay. But one thing we will not do is bow down to your golden statue or your gods. I just really wonder what the encounter must have been. And it's clear that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's, trust and belief in God was centered into something so deep and so powerful that they were not willing to let go of. And I was just thinking that it's just so important to cultivate an understanding and relationship with God that will allow you to stand, especially when you are being challenged in terms of your faith, and allow you to stand and be like, I'm not compromising. I know who my God is. I know what my God says. So I will not be bowing down to any idol. I will not be bowing down to any foreign God. For I know the one and only true living God. You know, I just think it's so beautiful that they're not willing to let anything distract them, and they were not willing to let anything intimidate them about their faith. I think that's just so powerful. But as I had mentioned earlier on in this video, that I want us to, look into why we actually believe in God. Is it due to the things that he can do for us, or is it just, the clear understanding that God is sovereign, and so he's worthy of praise regardless of the situation and circumstance? Because when you read in Daniel chapter 3, it's clear that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's faith was not circumstantial. It's not because they had seen the fiery furnace being set ablaze that they were just now like, okay, well, we're gonna stop, serving God. We're gonna stop, living life in a way that honors God. But even with the fire, they were willing to stay the course. They were willing to call upon that name. They were willing to trust in God. And I just think that is so beautiful. And so this is just encouragement for you and I, that God will definitely rescue us, right? Just like they believed that God would rescue them from the burning fire. But it's like, even if he doesn't rescue us, even if we don't get what we want, even if things don't go our way, even if our circumstances and situations don't look the way that we want them to look, we will not bow to any other God or any other treasure, right? And I just think that's beautiful, and I believe it's something that we should all, just lean into. And the exciting thing about this story is that it doesn't only end in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just declaring that they will not be worshipping the golden statue, but it's that God actually does rescue them. They believed God would rescue them, and God did the most. Verse 19 continues to say, the heading is the blazing furnace. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. Verse 24. But suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. Verse 25. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th looks like a god." Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." Isn't that so beautiful? I feel like that's so beautiful. For me, as I was reading this, it just proved and showed to me that if we keep our faith in God, in the foreign land, in the place where, we are challenged about our faith, in the place where we are intimidated into surrendering to the gods of that place, we will see a miracle. Like, God will come through for us. And, not only for us, but to show his sovereignty even to the people who don't believe in the same God we believe in, who have chosen to, idolize other things other than the God of the Bible, other than the God who gave his son Jesus, So I just really think it's just so powerful. And I hope you guys heard me and heard my heart when I say it's important, to trust and believe in God and not to conform to the standards of this world and to live a holy life. And you know what? People may not get it. People may have opinions about it. People may intimidate you about it. But just believe that the miracle of God is in you declaring your faith and living out boldly in your faith. Right? So yeah, in a nutshell, that's basically what I wanted to share, from reading the book of Daniel this morning. There's obviously a whole lot that's happening in this book that's powerful, and I really encourage, anyone who's watching this video to go and read the book of Daniel themselves, and just to see what a set apart life looks like, and just to see, how God comes through for someone who, keeps the faith, lives a holy life, and is found innocent in the eyes of God, and someone who's not willing to compromise their relationship with God, despite the odds they face, right? And also, what's really so exciting about this book is how God elevates, those who believe in him, those who do his will. So I just think that's so beautiful. It was so exciting for me to read, and I had to come on here and share it. I hope you were inspired and encouraged by this video. Please don't hesitate to comment on the comment section down below. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Share this video, and of course, give it a like if you found it helpful. And if you learned something new. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, love you lots. Bye.